Well, hello everyone. In this lecture, we will be talking about the remaining amendments. So the last time that we spoke, we went through the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. This time we will be talking about Amendment 11 through 27. So let's dive right in. With the first of these amendments, the 11th Amendment, let me pull this up here so that we can actually see the text of this amendment. This is an odd amendment, which, like all of the amendments, really, they were intended to address either some perceived defect in the original Constitution or to add some or clarify some additional rights that have been identified. In this one, this modified something that the original Constitution apparently permitted. What the Constitution says, Amendment 11 says, I'm going to read it to you, and then I will have to explain it to you because this is it's a little bit complex. It says, the judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity. And those two terms we will discuss when we get to the judicial branch. Commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state. Okay, what this means is that if I want to sue a state, I am not permitted to sue a state. This is called the Sovereign Immunity Amendment. Well, the way that this amendment came about was following the end of the Revolutionary War. I think we previously mentioned it when we were talking about Alexander Hamilton's idea of creating a national bank, that a number of those soldiers had never been paid for their service, and their states, the respective states where they lived, did not have the money to pay them off. And so what Hamilton had proposed was to create a national bank, and one of the first things that bank would do would be to pay off those soldiers. Well, before that bank came into existence, there were speculators that went around and contacted the soldiers and offered to buy their the debt that the state owed to them. They carried an IOU basically from their state, and these speculators would come to purchase the IOU, not at full face value, of course, but at a discount. And many of those soldiers had thought, well, it's a bird in the hand is better than waiting until the state decides to pay me. And one of the people that did this was a fellow named Chisholm. And let me pull up his case. Alexander Chisholm had bought a bunch of this scrip, I'm going to call it. It's old debt, and he was not. And the debt that he purchased was from a number of people in the state of Georgia, and he wasn't a resident of the state of Georgia. And so what he decided to do was to sue the state of Georgia to make them pay this debt that they owed. The state of Georgia was outraged. The government, the governor, I suppose, was outraged that this was being done because they felt that it was common knowledge that you simply cannot sue a sovereign. You can't sue the king. You can't sue the government for governing. I mean, you can sue the government for other reasons like negligence and some things, some exceptions like that. But in the general scheme of things, you cannot sue a government for doing its governing. But that's what Mr. Chisholm was doing. And so Georgia, because they felt that they did not, they had a right not to be sued, did not even show up in court, did not answer it, just ignored it. And it it went into the judge received the complaint. When Georgia did not respond, the judge entered a judgment against the state of Georgia, and this went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and we have this case. Here it is. Alexander Chisholm versus the state of Georgia, decided in 1793. And if you read the facts of the case, it says here that Chisholm attempted to sue the state of Georgia in the U.S. Supreme Court over payments due him for goods that another fellow had supplied for Georgia during the Revolutionary War. And Chisholm had purchased this debt. And the defendant, Georgia, refused to appear, claiming that as a sovereign state, it could not be sued without consenting. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, you absolutely can. Under the way that the Constitution reads, Article 3, Section 2, they do have the right to sue you. So this was a perceived flaw in the Constitution. I'm certain that the founders did not had no intent to abrogate the right of a state not to be sued. So this amendment, the 11th Amendment, fixes that little problem. So like I said, in general, you can't sue the state, but most states do have exceptions. If a state worker, for example, injures you by accident through negligence, sometimes you can sue the state to cover your injuries, but normally you can't. All right, so that's the 11th Amendment. Let's move on to the 12th Amendment. We'll see what that says right here. The 12th Amendment corrects the problem with the way that elections were handled. If you remember, I'm not going to read the text of this. I'm just going to tell you what it means. If you remember in the election when Thomas Jefferson was trying to be president, the election came to a tie in the Electoral College, and that tie then went to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives it tied in the House of Representatives. So it was hugely embarrassing for this fledgling government to be unable to even figure out who its new leader was going to be. So the 12th Amendment modifies that so that no longer does the president get the most votes and the vice president is the runner-up with the next most votes. No, instead, what the 12th Amendment requires is that the Electoral College casts separate votes, one for president, one for vice president. And as things work out, they generally do this president and vice president run as a team. So that's what the 12th Amendment says. Now, there are no other amendments until following the Civil War. So the remaining amendments are the Civil War amendments. So let's take a quick look at those. In 1865, the 13th Amendment is ratified, saying that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereby the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So the 13th Amendment eliminates slavery. Finally, pardon me, removes slavery as makes it illegal. Abolishes slavery. The 14th Amendment, this is a very interesting amendment because I'm just going to read the first section. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. I'm going to come back and talk about that sentence just a minute. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, this is very important because of this last clause here. For the very first time, the United States Constitution guarantees equality to its citizens. It had not previously done that. So the idea here is that we want to make certain that the law applies equally to all persons, whether white or black, whether slave or no. Now, this first sentence, this is meant to clarify a previous U.S. Supreme Court case. And I'm going to pull up that case right now because we have to take a look at that in order to understand why they created this. All right, so let me just quickly do this to make sure that we're looking at the right page. Here is the case of Dred Scott versus Sanford. In this case, Dred Scott was a slave in Missouri, and his owner moved from Missouri to a free state, Illinois. And under the rules up until that time in Missouri, if you were a slave and your owner took you to a free state and stayed there for a period of time, when you returned to Missouri, you could sue for your freedom. And that was the state of the law. But in this case, the Missouri Supreme Court suddenly decided that they were not going to permit that anymore. And it was a great shock to Dred Scott when he lost his case, because there had long been precedent in Missouri that you could do that. So some people on his behalf took the case all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and there was some hope that the United States Supreme Court would find that slavery is unconstitutional. It violates the Constitution. But rather than doing that, instead the Supreme Court did the exact opposite, drafted by this gentleman here, Roger Taney. He stated that African Americans held as slaves are property. They don't have any rights. They're not citizens. And because they are not citizens, they have no authority to sue in federal court for their freedom. It was it is largely viewed as one of the worst decisions of the United States Supreme Court. And because of this decision, this is why the 14th Amendment was in part was passed. And that's why this first sentence here is designed to undo the effects of the Dred Scott decision. If you were born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, you are a citizen. The interesting thing about this, though, is it's also the basis for the common belief that if you are an illegal immigrant and you have a child here in the United States, that a child of an illegal immigrant is also a citizen. And that is largely because of this case, United States versus Wong Kim Ark, which was decided in 1898. And this is a fascinating case because it provides the basis for that interpretation of the Constitution, that if you are born in the United States, you are a citizen. The question that remains unanswered, however, is what is the meaning of this clause right here, subject to the jurisdiction thereof? Now, I don't have an answer for this because the specific question has never been before the United States Supreme Court. But I've heard the argument being made that illegal immigrants who have children here in this country, those illegal immigrants, their children might not be a citizen because they're illegal and they have not subjected themselves to the jurisdiction of the United States. This case, United States versus Wong Kim Ark, is the facts of this case are as follows. Wong Kim Ark's family, parents, were here in the United States legally. They weren't citizens, but they were here legally. And Wong Kim Ark would periodically visit relatives in China, and when he returned, he was always permitted to come in because he said, "I was born here," and the immigration people always allowed him to come in. There was a bit of a problem though because of this thing called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Federal government had passed a law that they were no longer permitting people of Chinese ancestry to immigrate into the United States. His parents apparently had come in prior to that act being adopted. It's again, I'm not going to get into the the validity of the Chinese Exclusion Act. It's obviously racist and something that we shouldn't have done, but nonetheless, that was the law at the time. So Wong Kim Ark eventually is stopped by immigration authorities when he comes back from China, and they say that under the Chinese Exclusion Act, you may not come in, even though you are claiming to be a citizen. And so the question posed to the Supreme Court is a child who was born in the United States to Chinese citizen parents who are lawful permanent residents of the United States, a U.S. citizen under the Citizenship Clause. And the U.S. Supreme Court said yes. Now, the reason why I say there is still a question is that this case does not specifically address a situation where the parents were not here lawfully. And I've heard the argument made. So this is something that needs to be resolved by the U.S. Supreme Court still. It's not been, and well, hopefully someday soon they will take it up and we'll get an answer to this very important question. But this is Wong Kim Ark is the basis for the citizenship interpretation that we currently use. All right, moving on to the 15th Amendment. This gives former slaves, male slaves, the right to vote. Women still had no right to vote. The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on any account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, not including, they don't include sex. That doesn't come up until the Progressive Era, approximately 50 years later. The 16th Amendment. This is the Income Tax Amendment. We all hate the Income Tax Amendment, but there it is. Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. So starting in 1913, the Internal Revenue Service was created. This is the source of it. The 17th Amendment. This changes the method of selecting our senators. If you remember, when the nation was first created, senators were supposed to be picked by the legislatures of each individual state. They were having some difficulty doing that. And besides, there was this perception that state legislatures, I can't imagine where they get this idea, but that state legislatures are largely corrupt. And they felt that because the state legislatures were corrupt, that the senators being chosen by those corrupt state legislatures would also be corrupt. Well, the other problem was that some of the states were deadlocked on who their senators were supposed to be. So this amendment fixes all that. Instead of allowing senators to be picked by the legislatures of each state, from now on, starting in 1913, we vote for senators just the same way as we vote for the House of Representatives. The 18th Amendment. Oh, the notorious 18th Amendment. This is the Prohibition Amendment. After 1 year, this is interesting. Pardon me. The language. After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, or the exportation thereof from the United States, and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. This, you will note that this does not prohibit the possession of intoxicating liquors. So what a lot of people did when they knew that this was coming, they bought as much liquor as they could and stored it. You're certainly permitted to have a stash of alcohol of your own that you've purchased, but you can't sell it, you can't transport it. All that is prohibited. But why did they do this? Why did they pass this amendment? Well, there's a fairly simple reason. This was the progressive era, and they were attempting through legislation to correct issues in society, and this was one of them. It really is a question of family. At this time, remember, in 1919, most women did not work. It was not, they were not supposed to work, they weren't expected to work, and the workplace didn't want them besides. I mean, things have changed since then for the better, but at the time, that's the way things were. So if you were a wife with no job, and your husband was the sole breadwinner in the family, the only source of income, but yet your husband was also a drunkard, what effect would this have on the family? What effect would this have on the women of the United States? Well, clearly it's not a pleasant thing. And so it was for that reason that this amendment was passed, was to try to protect the wives of the drunkards of the United States. As we know, it did not work out that well because people will have their drink. But this is the beginning. This is the beginnings of the Prohibition era, with the ratification of the 18th Amendment in January of 1919. The next amendment, the 19th Amendment, this gives women the right to vote. Finally, in August of 1920, this was ratified. The 20th Amendment. This is sometimes referred to as the lame duck amendment. Under the original Constitution, you might remember that the president was inaugurated. The inauguration day was in March. The election was finalized. Well, really, you know, from all intents and purposes, we knew by December who the new president was going to be. And the electoral college ballots are opened on January 6th. So there are several months during which the president, who is still in office but who has been voted out of office, has to under the original Constitution to do all kinds of damage. The concept of a lame duck goes to the notion of duck hunters who I'm not a duck hunter, but I can imagine that if you brought the way that you do this is you go out with your hunting rifle and you shoot these you shoot these creatures, and then your hunting dog goes out into the water to bring the duck back. And if you have a lame duck, a duck that is not killed by the bullet, merely injured, it can flap around and do all kinds of damage within your boat. It's never mind my personal feelings about it, but that's the origins of the term, the lame duck amendment. This was to get the president out of office, the president who has lost the election out of office sooner. So now the president and vice president end their term of office on the 20th at noon on the 20th day of January, and that's when the inauguration takes place. 21st Amendment. This repeals Prohibition Amendment. They finally got wise in 1933. It was not working. It's interesting to notice, though, if you read the language here, the transportation or importation into any state, territory, or possession of the United States for delivery or use therein of intoxicating liquors in violation of the laws thereof is hereby prohibited. So some places are still dry. There's some counties within certain states that don't permit liquor within their territories. So this is written in the negative, so that if there are places that still don't want to have any alcohol within their their borders, they can do that. All right. That's the 21st Amendment, repealing the Prohibition Amendment. The 22nd Amendment, this was ratified in 1951, shortly after Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Democrat, served 4 terms as President of the United States. Following his death in office, Republicans got together and drafted this amendment, hoping that that their desire was to prevent any Democrat from ever serving in office that long ever again. And this was ratified in 1951. It specifically says that no president may serve more than twice. Now, there is one exception to this, which some comedian that I heard many years ago suggest, and that is that if we had a president that we thought we were particularly fond of, but he was term limited out, one exception could be that, let's say I could run for president with our favorite president acting as my vice presidential candidate. And when I win the election, I would then immediately resign and allow, the favorite president, the one we want to serve another term, to move up into office. This 22nd Amendment doesn't preclude that as a possibility. But it requires some unusual machinations, which don't seem likely to occur. But there it is. If you ever want to have a possibility of a great president serving a third term, that's the way you would do it. 23rd Amendment. We're now moving into the era of the square deal. 23rd Amendment gives for the first time a vote to the people who live in the District of Columbia. Up until this time, actually, when D.C. was created, it was not very populous. It was a swamp which they had to drain. But what this does is it finally gives the people who sit in the District of Columbia, who live there, a way to vote for their president. The 24th Amendment, the right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senator or representative in Congress shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. Some states were hoping to exclude certain individuals, mostly the poor, and certainly the poor black people of their state, to preclude them from voting because they hadn't paid the poll tax. This eliminates that, the Civil Rights era. The 25th Amendment. This clarifies what happens should the president die in office. And of course, they're thinking of in 1967, the recent assassination within a few years prior of John F. Kennedy. What's the mechanism that takes place when the president is killed or dies in office? Well, this says the vice president shall become president. Up until this time, there was some question as to exactly what the president's role was going to be. Is he the acting president, or is he actually the president? This also provides that when there's a vacancy in the office of the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. All right. Well, so when JFK was assassinated, well, let's actually talk about Richard Nixon, because there we have a much more interesting situation. Richard Nixon resigned because of the Watergate scandal. To my knowledge, there isn't any information that we have that he authorized the burglary and break-in at the Democratic National Headquarters in the Watergate Center. But there is evidence that he attempted to cover up the fact that the men who had committed the burglary were, on his payroll. Nixon resigned, And oddly enough, shortly before this happened, there was another scandal where Nixon's vice president was indicted for taking bribes and also some kind of problems with his income tax. And so his name was Spiro Agnew, resigned, and President Nixon then appointed Gerald Ford as the vice president under this section of the 25th Amendment. So we have a vice president who was never voted for. We, the people, never voted for Gerald Ford, and then Nixon resigns from office to avoid being impeached. Ford moves up and now is president, even though we never voted for him, and he then has to appoint a new vice president. So both the vice president and president of the United States in the early 1970s were two men that no individual citizen had ever voted for. And it's not too surprising that when the election did come up, Gerald Ford did not win. He lost. I don't think anybody expected him to win, but he didn't win. But all right, that's the impact of the 25th Amendment. This also allows the president to temporarily step away from the office if he has to undergo, say, some kind of a surgical procedure, which happens several times with many of our presidents, where they've got to be put under sedation to undergo this some kind of procedure. He simply transmits a letter to the president pro tem of the Senate, and the vice president takes over his duties until the president is fit for office again. So this allows the president a way to step away from the office temporarily. This also allows the Congress to declare that the president is unable to discharge his or her duties. There was some discussion of doing that, and I suppose there's always some discussion of doing that by the opposing party whenever a particularly unpopular president is in office. But all right, we'll move on. The 26th Amendment changes the right of the voting age from 21, which is what it was at the time, down to 18. And this is largely, we're 1971 we're talking about. That's largely because of the tremendous unpopularity of the Vietnam War. Pardon me. Young men were eligible to be drafted at the age of 18, but they could not vote. So it seemed like it was not fair for young men of that age you can fight and die for your country, but you can't vote. So this that changes the voting age down to 18 for all citizens of the United States. Finally, the 27th Amendment. This was one of the original amendments proposed by James Madison back in 1790, when the original Bill of Rights was being considered. But this one was not adopted then, and so it's finally ratified in May of 1992. So it has the record of having been proposed in September of 1789 and not ratified until 1992. But what it says is that no law varying the compensation for the services of senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. So if they vote themselves a pay raise, we can vote them out of office before they get the benefit of that pay raise. All right, folks, we've now looked at the entire Constitution, the body of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the remaining 17 amendments. When we get together the next time, we will talk about federalism, which is the relationship of the states to the federal government and what powers each of them has, and how the sharing of power between federal and state has changed over the years. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we will see you next time.